Pensado's Place is brought to you by...
You're going to meet the amazing, multifaceted Feldy. DK's got a special deal for you. We got a brand new ITL. You are at the place. It's Pensado's Place.
Yay! What's up, everybody? Glad to have you this week. I'm rested and raring to go.
Yeah.
HT, what's up?
I'm rested, tanned, and ready to go as well. How about you?
You do look ravishing.
Oh, thank you, thank you. We might not want to show this side of our relationship.
Oh, we already came out of the closet earlier today with our 22-year relationship.
We did, absolutely.
What's new, right? We're an LGBT-friendly show.
Absolutely. It's just been a great couple weeks.
It has.
We're still Zooming. We're off into some next phase stuff, and so far it's going to be a really interesting next 4 or 5
Thanks
weeks.
to all these guys.
Yeah. No, we've got amazing fans. We've got good stuff for them, so why don't we get to it in a hurry? How about that?
Let's do it, my friend.
So, hey everybody, it is great to see you as usual. We are broadcasting from the Art Institute of California, Los Angeles, right near the Santa Monica Beach, the Santa Monica Airport. We are chilling. How about that? We're in our beautiful HD TV studio, HD, which officially stands for...
Hunker down. We got to hunker down, my man.
Hunker down. Can't tell you, we are in some discussions about how we can continue to grow and come to you. So please understand when we tell you that your likes and subscribes continue to power this show.
Absolutely.
Is absolutely true.
Absolutely.
Most appreciated. Keep it up. Hit those subscribes hard at YouTube, likes at Facebook for us. What we really want to do is take the Gear Expos and the Mix Fest and the other things that we think about doing and bring them to you and not just have you come here. Those things help. So we're going to shoot more content. We've got a lot of stuff to do. So this is really your show, and your activism really helps us with that. So can't tell you how much we appreciate the participation. Let's say hello to our family.
Absolutely.
Avid, what's happening?
Avid's
coming to us with some special stuff in about a month, right?
Middle of August, I think.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
About a couple of weeks, yeah.
So stay tuned for that. And our Vintage King boys, they're just aggressive. They are bringing the noise. They're all back in Detroit this week doing some planning. Dave, do you have a Stump the Vintage King guy question?
I do. I'm conflicted. Should I leave my hard drives on all the time, or should I cut them off every night? Which would give me the best chance for no hard drive failure and keep me happy?
Very good question. So we'll get that answered. You'll see it below us. As I alluded to at the top of the show, VK's got a very cool thing to offer to you guys with a friend of ours. Here's what you do. Go to vintageking.com/Pensado deals. That's vintageking.com/Pensado deals. Enter the promo code WeLoveMog. That would be MAAG. We Love Mog. You'll get $100 off the Mog Audio EQ4 plugin. We can't do this without saying hello to Cliff Mog, right?
Cliff's my man. I tell you what, ask any assistant I've ever had, I use something that Cliff Mog makes on just about every mix I do. Probably every mix I do wouldn't be an exaggeration. The man, his 10K up is better than anybody's.
And on top of that, he's just a salt of the earth kind of guy.
Salt of the earth.
Really good guy. So this promotion runs now for 2 weeks. Make sure you get there, blow up the site, take advantage of it. We're happy to bring it to you. We've got a great ITL and a great guest. Why don't you introduce the ITL and let's get it popping.
This week's ITL, I was trying to, I don't know how to describe it. As you guys know, compression used to confuse the hell out of me, still does sometimes. And I thought I had this ratio thing figured out, and I wanted to share that with you. So I think I got it figured out. Check this one out. Today I want to delve a little bit deeper into compression ratios. So I want to sometimes we get confused about some of the parameters. Well, sometimes I get confused about some of the parameters in compression. But today I want to focus on just the ratio parameter. I'm going to use a song by my friend Cozy. His group is We Are Remix. Now, there's different ways to think about what ratio does. One of the ways I like to think about it is I've got a ceiling, and this ceiling is imaginary. That ceiling sound is trying to bump up against this ceiling. Now, they can go past the ceiling. Now, the ceiling represents, in my mind, the threshold setting on a compressor. Now, not all compressors have a threshold setting. Well, that's another subject. Now, what ratio does is if I've got a sound and I set my ratio of 2 to 1, for every 2 dB above threshold, the ratio says bring it down 1. So if I go 8 dB above threshold, it brings it down to 4 dB. So you can see if I increase the ratio, like say to 16 to 1, every time I go 16 dB above threshold, it would bring it down to 1, or 32 would bring it down to 2. So lower thresholds allow lower ratios allow. So a lower ratio allows more dynamics to take place above threshold. I guess you should say it allows more dynamics to take place, period. So in my mind, I think sometimes lower ratios crank down the threshold, so I get more happening above the threshold, but at a lower ratio. Sometimes I like that combination on stereo buses. Sometimes on basses I might use a more drastic ratio, like 8 to 1, 12 to 1. And I'm going to show you today on a vocal what happens with a couple of different thresholds, a couple of different ratios in terms of the feel and what we're trying to do. So if we're trying to keep something within a certain dynamic range, as the ratio gets higher and higher, we go into what's called limiting. So a limiter technically is a compressor with a very high ratio. General consensus somewhere around a 50 to 1 ratio, you start limiting. And then what we call a brick wall limiter is nothing gets above threshold. There's a brick ceiling on that threshold, so the ratio, I guess, could be infinity to 1. So, or did I say it backwards? 1 to infinity. Anyway, look it up. You guys got to do some work yourselves too. So let me play this example and show you something. While this is loading up, I want you to notice on the screen this little chart. Now this is what happens on the classic DBX 160 XT compressor. I was wondering, why is it that I can't get my plugins to sound like it? Now this is interesting because the attack time is program dependent. So depending on how many dB I'm knocking off, the attack time changes. The release time is program dependent. Copy this, because these will allow you to get some really cool drum compressor sounds, because the DBX 160X is thought of as, by me anyway, is thought of as a great drum compressor. Now here's a basic compressor. I'm using a little slower attack time. We've got a ratio of around 2 to 1. Release, I'd say a little bit on the longer side. And we're going to set the threshold to just knock off a couple of dB. Let's check it out.
When you see me coming alive, when you see me coming alive, when you see me coming.
Now what you heard was the word when has to have that attack on it, and if we smooth that word out, we lose a little bit of the energy. And then UC is kind of tucked in a little, and then coming alive is another important energy word. So I'm using a 2 to 1 ratio, so focus on the emotion and feeling we're feeling in that 2 to 1 ratio.
When you see me coming alive, when you see me coming alive.
Now let me take the compressor off and focus on the same concept.
When you see me coming alive, when you see me coming alive, when you see me coming alive, when you see me coming alive.
It must have gotten a tiny bit louder, but you guys are sophisticated. You can substitute in your head for that little extra volume. So what I'm hearing on the compressed version is the wind came down, coming came down, and it came to a closer level to the other words, and now we turn the when and the coming back up to the original level where they were, and now we've brought with those words the level of the other words. So we tried to keep the dynamics and the importance of that energy in those two words, when and coming, but we've gotten the other words up to start contributing a little bit to the energy too. Now, as we increase the ratio, we get them all more even, but when they're even, there's nothing to impart that energy. That dynamic range contains the energy. So let's see if we can hear when we lose that.
When you see me coming alive, when you see me.
Okay, focus on this number right here, this ratio number.
When you see me coming alive, 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 when you see me coming alive.
Did you feel the energy kind of go away? If you didn't, don't worry. Some of these things take a minute to hear. Just play that reference over and over again, and really train your ear to focus on the energy and the emotion in that line. There's a little tiny, it's not a crack in his voice, but it's a little tiny Michael Jackson little thing that's going on there, so we don't want to destroy that. There's a lot of subtleties going on, and it might take you a couple of tries to hear it, but don't get discouraged. You can hear it, but more importantly, you want to feel it. I get asked a lot, should I put my equalizer in front of the compressor or after the compressor? The basic rule of thumb is, if you've got a frequency that's causing the compressor to do things you don't like, then put an EQ in front of the compressor and take that frequency out. For example, in a vocal, if you've got a lot of low-end muddiness actually affecting what your compressor is doing, put something in front of the compressor, roll that out. It might be a little bit too much 2K. Roll that out, and now your compressor is acting to different frequencies. You might ask, well, Dave, what's the difference between that and side chaining? Well, side chaining, we're concerned with the compression of certain frequencies. Here, we don't want certain frequencies to affect the compression. And if you put the equalizer after the compressor, what you're doing, obviously, is EQing the compressed signal. When would you do that? Sometimes, with some attack times, you might take too much low end out of your kick drum. I tend to keep the attack times on my kick drums a little on the high side, 30 to 50, somewhere in there, and that gives me a little bit more low end. And if you've taken off a little bit of low end from the compressor of the kick drum, but adding a little bit of the attack by doing that, then you might want to add a little bit of low end back into the compressor. On some of the side chain stuff I've shown you, the side chain track, I compress the snot out of the drum, and if on a kick I lose so much low end, I'll take an API 550 or a Pultec, and I'll drop that in after the compressor and add those low frequencies back. Always remember, compression can add to the experience of a particular track and a body of music, or it can really take away from it. You're squeezing more into a smaller space, which can be a good thing, but you're also squeezing more energy into a smaller space, and nothing's jumping out at you. So play around with it. For some of you, this is going to come really quick and easy, and some of you it's going to be a little harder to hear. Me personally, compression was the last thing I really felt like I nailed in terms of my growth. So don't get discouraged, and experiment. You've got so many options now in your DAW that you can really use presets, see what other people are doing, and let me know how you're doing, okay? All right.
We're back. So we are happy to welcome to our desk an incredible producer, engineer, artist, musician, A&R person, arranger, programmer, and something near and dear to his heart, songwriter. We're welcoming to our desk the incredible John Feldmann.
Hey, John, what's up?
What's happening? Oh, you're still working that line? It hasn't worked yet.
Shaking the fist.
You're gonna keep working. We have so much to cover. I mean, you have such a diverse career. I think, Dave, let's go down some of the musical past, and I want to come back and hit some of your other things.
John, the first time I heard The Used, it just freaked me out. A good buddy of mine, Todd, called me, and Todd Chapman said, "Man, you got to hear this record." And man, it was everything he said it was. You actually signed those guys, didn't you?
I did, yeah.
Wow.
To which label?
That was Warner Brothers. So I was with Maverick for like 5 years prior, and then they were the first act I signed at Warner's.
Guy Osiri.
Guy Osiri with at Maverick, and then I was with Tom Wally at Warner's.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Goldfinger is not a household name, but the band you were in, Goldfinger, bass and guitar, wrote, that band, pretty influential band. Third wave ska. Explain third wave ska.
Well, there's Desmond Decker, right? I mean, there's really like the Wailers,
Yeah.
first wave.
Yeah,
Desmond Decker, like back in the 60s, you know, and the way I hear it, I guess, radio waves would get to Jamaica and there'd be all the weather to deal with, so they'd come in these kind of offbeat so you'd only hear half of the music, and so that's how they thought the music was written. With
I never knew
with
that.
the upbeat.
You're making that up.
Wait,
I'm
stop.
not making that
Get
up. This
outta
is the way
here.
I hear how ska was invented, right?
Oh,
Back in the
wow.
60s, right? So it was the first wave, and then
Yeah.
the second wave happened in England back in the early 80s with Madness and the Specials, English Beat. And so my first concert was the English Beat, you know, when I was in high school. And that just, I mean, it was just fun. It was party music. It was just like, it changed my life. You know?
Wow. And then Goldfinger comes along.
You know, I was selling shoes right here on the promenade, this place called Nana, selling Doc Martin shoes, you know, and I'd been playing in a band, you know, rehearsing downtown rehearsals every day, so I'd work, go downtown, made my demo tape, and I was just thinking about like how I got here, because I'm a huge fan of the show, like a lot of people in our business, you know, and I've got this intern about 6 months ago turned me on to you guys, and his name's Herman Virgin, which is the greatest name of all time.
Ever.
But like Pensado's place is like his red tube. It's like his U-porn, you know. I mean, he can't stop. Once he starts, he's just like he goes and goes, you know. And I was thinking about how I got here, like how I'm here talking to you guys about music and how like life sort of unfolds, you know, and just taking the next indicated action and just, you know, thinking about, you know, Goldfinger especially, like music saved my life, like most of us, you know, at some point. I was definitely not athletically inclined. I was just a super klutzy kid, super nervous and, you know, scared of everything. And then all of a sudden I discovered
music.
Yeah, I discovered music and my calling. I learned how to play the bass guitar, you know, with a pick.
Yep.
And, you know, and thinking about going, like rehearsing in this band, selling shoes and rehearsing until 4 a.m, sleeping for 2 hours, back to work selling shoes. This guy just came in and he just recognized me from some older band I was in. I sold him a pair of Doc Martens and I stuck, you know, my demo tape in his shoebox.
Nice.
And, you know, I was signed to this record deal like 3 weeks later. That was in early 1994.
Wow.
And I've just been doing this ever since. I mean, I think about all the great things, like meeting the Used and meeting my wife. All these great moments have kind of come just being there.
Yeah.
Like if I wasn't there
wouldn't
at the shoe store, I wouldn't have met
right.
this dude that said, "Hey, you got a demo tape," you know, because you know, this is back in the cassette days, you know, and
Yep.
you know, I wouldn't have worked. My life wouldn't have worked out that way. But you know,
It's a great point.
you know, I love punk rock. I grew up on ska music, and the band that we kind of put together was definitely. I mean, I thought this is what I wanted to do, and it just started with the idea, the vision of it, you know.
I mean, in his particular case, one of the points you made that I love, which is really important for our audience, is sometimes you get to where you want to go by living life. You just got to let it happen to you. An attorney.
Well, you got to show up, man.
Yeah.
That's the thing. It's like a lot of people just won't just show up.
That's
because
right.
They're scared of the results or what's going to happen, but just
Can't
kind
do
of
it that
being
way.
there.
Yeah.
And kind of everything. Like I can only really think about hindsight, listening to, for me it was the Buzzcocks and hearing the bass guitar and the kick drum on vinyl, and thinking, how does the bass guitar sound so punchy? Like as a 14, 13-year-old kid, not really understanding how, you know, that symbiotic relationship is, but just going, how does the bass sound so, and then realizing it's the kick drum, and then later on going back and listening to those records as a producer and saying, how do I make that happen? You know, that sort of thing.
Absolutely.
My friend Todd Chapman told me to ask you this question, so I will. We were sitting listening to one of your records, one of the Used records, and I swear you're leaving the the peepops, the plosives, you're turning those into like little events. Like my whole career, I'm taking those damn things out, and here you're making them like little hooks. Like you leave the in there.
Yeah.
What's up with that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess it's a conscious thing. I spend more time on vocals than anything else. I mean, I'm a singer, and I think that, you know, if you're a non-musician, you're really going to be singing along to of course, for me, it's the most important thing. And, you know, with Bert, I mean, I still haven't recorded anyone as dynamic as him. In the first record, I mean, it was like I had vintage C12, and we're in the same room. There's no vocal booth. It's just we have one small room in my house in Marina Del Rey. That's just my makeshift studio with the, you know, egg cartons nailed to the, you know, the whole, you know, first studio. And he's got, so I've got this C12, this like $12,000 microphone next to this, you know, garbage can, because he's throwing up in between takes. And so the idea of capturing the energy, like there's
That's a plosive. Do you have a plug-in for that?
So much energy coming out that he can't even stop. And he's like in between takes, he's like throwing up. And so to me, when I'm mixing that album, I'm thinking, what do I want to take out? You know, because you think that all the time. You know, how much filtering do you want to do with the vocal? And so some of them I'd filter, but some of them it would actually, here's the chorus with those plosives. You know,
Wow.
I mean,
a tom fill.
Exactly, like using it like a percussive instrument, you know. But I mean, he's a really unique kid. I mean, they were just so that band was so driven to meet me. They just knew that I was the guy. They're huge fans of my band when we met him. And I mean, the singer, Bert is a singer. He came on our bus and our tour bus when we were in Salt Lake City, and literally like he got thrown out by the tour man. He was so like, here's the demo tape, as he's like throwing it out, and you know, you just never know.
Right.
Again, it was just there.
Living life.
I was just there.
Amazing.
On Pretty Handsome Awkward, the album and the song, first of all, what a great record. Congratulations on that record too. On that song, you take the pans, and the panning almost becomes a hook. It's kind of like you hang out in a museum a lot and you pan visually, and then the pans are dynamic. Is that a conscious thing? I notice you do that in a lot of your songs.
Well, that song specifically, like we were just. Some of the guys in the band like to smoke some weed, so they'll jam, and they're not really they're your classic sort of Fish or they're Dead or anything, but they would just jam. And this one moment, just that riff, you know, just kind of came out of the speaker. I said, that right there, you know, like producers supposed to do, right? Pick those moments and say, that's where we're going to start with this song. And you know, the idea of, you know, the guitar player Quinn is sort of like a shredder or like an Eddie Van Halen is probably the exact opposite of what he is. He's definitely a very not that Eddie Van Halen isn't musical, but I mean, you know, Quinn's more of like it's a symphonic guitar player,
melodic.
And yeah, exactly. And so he would. I mean, when we would do one pass, and I'd have to take doubles from one pass because he wouldn't really be able to double stuff the way a lot of guitar players would learn a part and do it. He would just kind of play, and I'd take it. And then, so panning kind of came in more for me of just being like 8 shots. I used to have the worst espresso machine ever. It would just collect the espresso like mud. So it would literally be like you're drinking like 8 shots in one because it was so thick, right? So like on my 4th shot, I just went under and I found the pencil tool, I think for one of the first times, and I was just kind of, it was like almost like art. Like what would this sound like? Not in grid mode, but just in slip mode to just kind of draw it in, and that's how I started my sort of journey. And
what a great idea.
Yeah, really like what panning can make, how it makes me feel. Because I mean, really music's about that anyway, how it makes you feel when you hear something. And,
kudos to you, because when I hit the mono button, it ain't
everything's
perfect.
out of phase. And
it ain't perfect, but I don't think it should be. I think if you own a black and white TV, you should be penalized. And I think if you work in mono, you should be penalized. Mono has the use, of course, I'm exaggerating. But how do you get the mix so wide? Part of it's what you're doing on guitars.
Well, I'll tell you, I used to use the S1 on the Master Fader, right? The Wave stereo imager. You know, I would just use it maybe like 25%. So it's just, all I'd really notice is the guitars. And then I actually met Chris Lord-Alge, and he's like, dude, you're gonna fuck up all the phase if you can't do that. And I'm like, and I had already done it. Like the used first record had it, and I didn't want to tell him. I'm like, well, okay, I won't do that anymore, you know. But I mean, I guess as part of it is
Chris worked on this record, by the way.
The 3rd record, yeah. I mean, part of it is experimenting and trying to push, you know, how you're gonna feel you're pushing yourself as a producer. I mean, part of it too is just experimenting, right? Because a lot of those albums, a lot of the vocals were made on an M-Box and an SM7 on a laptop. We would just take a trip because, I mean, I really believe that the creative process isn't something that you can say, we have these four walls and we're gonna create everything right here. You know, sometimes just going to the bathroom, you get another idea, just stepping out for a second. But we would go on these like surf road trips. We'd stay up, you know, on that espresso mud, and we would just go at like 4 or 5 in the morning, drive up the coast and hit Cambria and San Simeon, and all of a sudden we'd have that. He'd be like, my voice feels right now. Get the laptop out, sun's coming up, and do the lead vocal that way, and then come home.
Love that.
But I mean, that sort of stuff, I'm sure happens probably a lot more these days. I mean, in the late '90s and the early 2000s, it was definitely like people were like, well, when are we going to do the real vocals? Where's the tube mic? Where's the real? Where's all that stuff? And I just used the preamp on the M-Box, and you know, clearly probably not your go-to preamp. But I mean, my first 2 records I made was on that Command 24, and I just used those Digit-Design preamps, you know, and I just didn't know any better because I was just learning. I mean, the first thing I ever had was that Akai 12 track, which had beta tapes. I just had to learn how to clean it with the rubbing alcohol.
People don't know, but it had a big ass cassette.
Huge, yeah, the
It
beta
was a
tape.
cassette that you recorded on. You got 12 channels. It came with its own mixer, and it sounded pretty doggone good. I mixed some stuff that was cut on that. I thought it was,
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question, John, finally. I don't know how to phrase this, but one of the things I like about your mixes is I never have to hunt for the vocals. I always know where the vocal is. I hear every word. But your vocals aren't what I would call loud. You like your vocals part of an ensemble. They sit in the track. They could almost be considered a little low technically. But I love that. How do you what compressor are you using, or what technique are you using to keep those vocals so audible, so in my face, but still let the guitars carry the power?
I mean, it's a great question, and a lot of times like I'll switch based on the interface, but based on the plug-in interfaces, I'm just sick of looking at the same colors. So like 2 or 3 records will go by, I just don't want to look at the EMI, that 2005 version they made of that. Like I use that on like 4 albums, and I'm like, I'm done with that, you know? So I mean, probably the last 5 records I've used a different vocal chain, but I mean, when I first started, it was the 6176, you know, just had the 610 on one side and had the 1176, the Universal Audio 2-space. Thing, and I used that C12 on the first like 4 records. I just love that mic, you know. But what happened is a lot of singers with their the capsule would get coated in spit, and so I think it was Stephen Paul that would clean it. And then he passed away. And so what happened is this microphone kept dying, and I had no one to repair it, you know, with this vintage gear. And that was really my initial vocal chain, you know. And I love the soft tube FET compressor now. I use that on most of my vocals. You know, I love their active EQ as well. I've been using the...
I use that on bass a lot, too.
Yeah, it's great. Really great on bass. And thank you for the voice of God, by the way. I watched one of your shows, and I'm like, what is that plug? You didn't even talk about it. It was just on the screen, and I like took a screenshot.
The Little Labs VOG, Colin Niceman, my assistant, he'll tell you I fire that puppy up on every live bass I use. I mix. I love that thing.
Yeah.
It's dangerous. You got to be real careful. It can be dangerous.
It's subtle though, but what it does for me on the bass is it just like it just brings it right in the middle.
But you didn't answer my question, damn it. How do you keep the vocal that even, that in my face, without making it loud?
Well, there's a lot of ways. I mean, most singers that have like that can sing in this, we'll call it punk rock, even though it probably isn't.
So
anymore.
it starts with the performance.
It's usually a 5-finger, right from the capsule to your mouth and the screen right there. You know, it's usually 5 fingers just to try and get. I'm usually 4-1 on. Right now, I'm using the Dragon, which is sort of a souped-up 11, like I think it sounds like that anniversary edition of the 1176. So I'm using that on vocals. I mean, the front of it looks like a fucking Ed Hardy T-shirt, but we'll ignore that for the moment.
How much are you knocking off on the compression? Like 6 dB?
Probably between 6 and 8. Yeah. So I mean, usually the aggressive music that I'm doing, I'm hitting it pretty hard. You know.
Man, I'll tell you what, it's as good as anything I've ever heard. The way you do that.
But it's also about like the breaths, because obviously you're getting every breath, you know, and so I'm having to go through in detail, and I just gain. gain reduce breaths. You know, I don't use the deep breather doesn't work, and I'm not cutting them out because you have to have that. And sometimes you leave them in as loud as the vocal. It just depends on the style of music that you have. But I mean, I really like the first few records I did. I was really against any echo or reverb. It was just dry. How dry can I make this? You know, lately I like revibe, and I mean, Echo Boy is definitely finds its way into a lot of stuff.
Well, speaking of reverb, the reverb on this particular song, what is that? It sounds like a deverb on Awkward. Is that
on Handsome Awkward?
Yeah.
That's actually revibe.
Oh, it's revibe.
Yeah.
What was it like? It just fits. It just. Golly, I don't know.
I think I did like a short, like a really short 16th note echo on Echo Boy, and I just did you know, a short reverb. That song is so kind of mid-tempo rocker. I didn't want it to really be taking away from the riff of the guitar.
Another thing that caught my ear. It's very rare that well, Cole might do it every day because he's a drummer, but I got excited about the sound of the cymbals, the drummer hitting the bell part of the cymbals in the bridge. Did he have like nylon tip sticks? How did he get that tone? Or is it something you did in mixing, or Chris did in mixing?
It's all EQ and compression. You know, I mean, I love that Manley dual mic pre. I think it's what they don't make them anymore, but it's just that two channel mic pre. I use that for most of my overheads. I love that. You know, I've been using the API.
It didn't sound like wood though. It sounded like something harder hitting the cymbal.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the time Brandon was using those the black sticks. I forget what they're called, but I don't even know if they're made out of wood. I think they may be made out of metal or something.
Huh?
K-head. A K-head?
A-head.
A-H-E-A-D? I'm not a drummer.
Drummers,
He
man.
said, Cole said
it's always the drummer. You know, yeah, in my band, it's all, I mean, I'm just, whatever. I guess stream of consciousness. I was on tour like a year ago, man, and you know, our drummer sleeps in the bunk above me, and he has a really special sock, man, that every night he would get very intimate with the sock, you know, and I remember about a year ago, I woke up, the thing had dropped down the bunk, and I woke up, it was stuck to my fucking face, man.
Oh, Jesus.
So that's why I like being in the studio more than being on the road these days.
Yeah, that would be reason.
That'd be a good use for our new product, right?
Yeah, we haven't released
The sticky sock? What's the new product?
I can't say.
Okay.
Herb will fire me. That bridge in that song is a real special moment, and I noticed that. I don't know if it's your ADHD or AHDAD or whatever the thing is, but you don't seem comfortable to let a song go more than 4 or 8 bars without something big happening, a big change. But that bridge is such a special moment.
Yeah.
I love the radio voice in that bridge. How did you do that?
At the time, and that was definitely all EQ, just like filtering it out and just like figuring out which frequencies are going to be right with his voice and making it sound like him. And it wasn't anything. There was no special plugin. It was probably a Focusrite EQ is what I was a huge fan of then. I loved the red back then. I was a fan of the red, and yeah, I mean, it was really. I mean, part of the vocals for me. I mean, when I was growing up, it was only musicals. My parents were very, super Catholic, and there was no rock and roll allowed in the house. So, I mean, really up until I was in 8th grade, I hadn't really heard anything other than Sound of Music, Music Man, Oklahoma.
Sure.
So a lot of the vocal, like all those kind of elements of vocal productions, probably to me stem back
from those early records.
Yeah, I remember even I was working with this band, We Are the In Crowd, and this guitar melody. I'm like, that sounds like this Oliver Twist moment, and it's just you don't know sometimes where your influences are going to come back out.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, to me, putting the harmonies and the stacked harmonies, and it's not really, I'm not at a piano figuring out, if the 7th is going to work here. I usually start with a 3rd. And then I kind of build off that, and it just kind of whatever feels like this makes me feel something if we add this harmony. And then if I take it out, if it makes me feel better, I take it out,
Another record of yours I like came out recently, Black Veil Brides. What a great record. I love In the End on that record. On the used record we've been talking about on Pretty Handsome, you kind of have the lead vocal a little more metal sounding, and the background vocals are just straight out pop. On Blackmail, on Slit Your Throat, you kind of did the opposite. You kind of had the background's kind of metal sounding, which is odd.
Yeah.
And then the other thing. But I noticed that you love melodic backgrounds and harmonies, like that you trigger something in my head. What you just said on In the End, the vocals sound kind of Beatles-ish on that song. Was that intentional?
I mean, look, I studied George Martin. I mean, he's definitely my, if I could say there's one guy, it would be him. You know, I've read a tremendous amount of literature on how they made albums back then, you know, and I love that, recording the Beatles book. I mean, I started recording bass because they used, you know, a C12 on bass because that's how McCartney recorded, you know, bass on Revolver, Rubber Soul, you know. But that song, it sort of started different than most of the stuff, and I mean the Beatles stuff comes through. I think whenever I'm recording. I mean, like any other, I guess, you know, influenced producer, right? Just, But I mean, as any other kind of creative guy, I mean, I started playing piano again about 6 months ago, and I'm certainly not like Liberace or anything, but it's like I wrote that song on piano in the end. I mean, I wrote at least the foundation of the song on piano, and so I think partly starting with the different kind of chords, because it's such a different sort of feeling when when you're really starting on guitar with like kind of 3 notes, and on piano you've got like, you know, 5, 6, 7. That kind of, I think, opened up the door to be able to bring those harmonies in more so than if it would have been written on guitar. I mean, I came up with the riff on guitar, but I mean, ultimately, the singer of that band he came to me with this, like, they made a movie out of making this record, right? You know, it's about the wild ones. The Serpentine matriarch takes over after Armageddon hits. He's got this whole concept written out, like a treatment for a movie before we even started one note of the album. And so In the End was one of the first songs we wrote, because we sort of kind of said at the end of this movie, this is kind of what it is. The beginning of it is the end of the world, and the end of it is when the wild ones take over. And so a lot of that kind of played into how the songs were produced, how the movie was going to be approached.
The guitars on that song, on the Black Veil song, when I think of metal, I think of a little extended high end, almost a little kind of buzzy high end. What did you use? Did you use a pedal to get that high end? What was your guitar chain on that record?
Well, I mean, when I started recording guitars, and we had the luxury of like making albums over the course of 3 or 4 months. When I started, I was able to do that. We had kind of, you know, bigger budgets or whatnot. And I would take, you know, I'd have my engineer in the closet, you know, going 1 millimeter at a time around the cone, you know. And so I mean, I've had the same cabinet for 20 years. It was a cabinet I used to tour with, and I just said, this thing is so special. It's all spray painted. It's like the Rode cabinet that we still have, that I still use. I've got 2 greenbacks and I've got 2 vintage 30s, you know, stacked. And I know exactly what.
For people that aren't guitar players, he's talking about a 25-watt Celestion and a 30-watt Celestion, which are the favorite of mine.
Yeah.
The 30s were actually part of the Marshall Major cabinet, but go ahead.
Yeah. But so I mean, I just love the idea of how to mix these different microphone sounds and these different speakers out of one cabinet with one amp, and be able to blend them. I have 4 mics that I bring up, and I blend them on my little Command 8 that I mix
that's
on.
kinda cool.
And so I have my little secret, the spot on the cabinet that sounds great. I mean, my favorite mic is that Beta 57, not the 57A, which is the one that's out now that has a bigger cone on it. It's just the flat one. It looks like a 57, but it's blue and silver. They made them for like 2 years, and it's the best sounding guitar mic I've ever heard. And I have 2 of them, and I can't find them anywhere. Wow. So I've got that, and I've got a KSM 32, which I use for kind of like lower.
What head did you use?
On that record, we used mostly a Soldano. You know, a little bit of Bad Cat, but I've got, you know, 5 or 6 amps that we go through, and the guitar player had is it called the Kepner? That's what it's called, right? Where he actually rips the soul out of all of my amps. Like, he came over one day and he's like, I love the Soldano, I love the Bad Cat. We just plugged it in, and it does this insane thing where it just takes all the tone and whatever and just puts it in this, like, it was so crazy how this amp works, you know. And so now he's touring with this Kepner that has all the exact sounds we used on the record, all the amps with the switch that goes back between all the different amps.
You remember that I think it was a green Ibanez Tube Screamer box? You're not using that on there, are you?
No.
What's that high-end sizzle?
I mean, it's probably the Waves SSL. I mean, I love some of CLA's presets, you know, for guitar that I kind of start with, and then I just back off the high end a bit.
It's an EQ thing.
It's an EQ thing for sure. Yeah, it's not a pedal. I mean, I don't think we used a lot of plugins like modeling on that. It was all real on that album, but I mean, it's funny because the way people record guitars now, I mean, really, most albums, at least metal albums that I've been watching on the periphery that I've mixed, have been done all DI. You know, so they're using Pod Farm and Metal Amp Room and stuff, and so you're able to, because you can see the transient much better when it's played with the DI, so you can put it on the grid better. But for me, it's like I haven't been able to find something that makes me feel the same way as a real amp. And maybe it's just when you're tracking and you could hear the low end in the next room when you get palm mute kind of thing. I don't know. For me, it's all about the amp.
You do this thing, I can't remember, I think it's that song, but you do it on a lot of songs where you'll start me off in the verse, a little kind of versy, but you go chorus before you get to the chorus. Like you get me four bars into the verse and then you just knock me out of my chair. And I'm thinking, okay, that's weird. That's just a little tiny verse, only four. But that's not even the chorus then. And that felt like a chorus. And then the chorus finally comes. Is that all you think about production? Because you love the 4 bars as much as I love the 8th bar.
Yeah. I mean, look, I don't know if it's the ADHD in me, or I don't know if why but what happens...
I was just teasing. You really got that?
Dude, who doesn't? Come on. If you got an iPhone, you got it. If you got an iPad in front of you, I don't know what
That's right.
You got your YouPorn right there watching it.
Exactly.
But I mean, for me, it's like I'll get to the chorus and I'll be like, okay, I definitely know that we've set it up. We've got it. I mean, even though it feels like the last couple of years, the pre-chorus has been sort of cut out in popular music. It feels like it's like there's an intro, a riff, and then, or the hook in the beginning, and then a verse, and then straight into the chorus. Where I'll get to the chorus and we'll be writing the song, and I'll feel like, okay, we've got it, but can we beat it? And that's where I think you've noticed a lot of my production. Like
I love it.
There'll be a post-chorus of like, what are we really trying to say? Because ultimately, the chorus is like the sum of the song. Like, what are we really trying to say? What is the point of the song? And that's what it should be in simple terms. Because if you go see a show, it's not like you want to be reading a book. It's not like I love Elvis Costello, but for the most part, if I go to a show, I want to be, singing along with everybody else.
One quick thing. Recently, you and I were talking about the importance of commitment. Can you just do a little soliloquy tirade, Feldmann style on that? Like, it's a pet peeve of mine where people don't want to commit anymore because we've got so many tracks now, and committing is one of the most important parts of creativity, isn't it?
Yeah, in the early days of when I had that 12 track, I had 2 pieces of gear. I had an SM7 and I had a DBX 160X. That's what I had, and I had the 12 track. And so everything that I did, I think we would borrow some 57s and 58s to do drums, but it was really like I had such limited options. So if I wanted distortion, I would distort the compressor, and it would be that way. And I think, like everyone else, you experiment and you lose your way to a certain extent of where you come from, but lately it's been more about just the math. I get into sessions and I've got last year, I'd have so many crashes in Pro Tools with all the virtual instruments because it's not 64-bit, and there were just so many crashes. I'd start committing, like while we're tracking, rather than leave it up to the mix to say, okay, I'm going to adjust the synth or I'm going to do whatever. I'm going to actually commit while we're doing it, only because I hated the crashes. I was like sitting there going, man, I can't stand it anymore. So we'd get a sound and we'd commit it. And lately, I just feel like with microphones, like I was experimenting with a lot of singers that started on a touring level and then go in the studio are used to actually feeling the mic against their mouth when they're singing. At least I did. I have a 58 and I want to feel that. I mean, lately it seems like bands start more with GarageBand and more with Logic or Pro Tools on their own, and then they tour. But there's still once in a while a band will come across. And so we were experimenting yesterday with just getting an SM7 and having the guy be able to lay on the ground and push his diaphragm up to get that performance we're looking for. And be able to
line flat.
Have him lying flat on the ground, Actually, he was actually crouched down. All the lights are off, candles are on, crouched down, just pushing that up just to get that performance. But I mean, really, it's how do you make the artist comfortable? And this has nothing to do with committing. That's my ADHD.
I was about to bring that up.
Yeah.
Well,
but yeah.
Let me tell you where it does, I think. What's fascinating about your career is that, and tell me if I'm in the right lane here, I think that you can find all kinds of ways to be stimulated and challenged creatively. That even your A&R work is part of that process where you can identify talent, help bring it to fore, and so forth, and punch some of those creative buttons in your head. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and because when I think about the Electric Hog period, you had those kind of bands.
Electric Love Hogs, dude.
Excuse me, Electric Love Hogs, and you had Pearl Jam and Korn and Tool, Alice in Chains, Rage Against the Machine, open up for you, and you're seeing that talent.
Yeah.
And could you see the greatness then? Could you just see? Were you even looking for it?
Most of it I could. I mean, the first time I saw Eddie Vedder play was at this backyard party that we played, and he couldn't face the crowd.
No
he
joke.
stared at the kick drum the whole time. So
Whoa.
sometimes, you never know what you're going to get. I mean, clearly he became much different than that guy. But yeah, I mean, I've always been attracted. I mean, if I could really, of all the things that I do, if I had to pick one, gun to my head, I mean, the idea of finding a kid that's in his garage that like doesn't, because those kids are going to change the world. They're not on Twitter. They're not on Facebook. I mean, maybe they are kind of, but they're not like as socially inept as you
They're
should
there by
be.
themselves doing their
They're
thing.
just like isolated by themselves. And to find that kid and to bring him out and to help his vision be realized is definitely the thing I've got the most sense of purpose from.
Same as me. I used to tell people that, because I've been lucky enough in my career where people pay you to do that. And I say the opportunity to be sort of an architect and curator of pop culture is that I take that sort of seriously. Like when somebody says, I'll pay you to do this and I trust your taste, I want to deliver, but what people don't know is how much you get from it.
Yeah.
Like it's just amazing to watch that come to fruition.
Oh yeah, I mean the U's grew up in Orem, Utah. This this super small, like isolated town. The first time they came to LA, I flew them out here.
Yeah.
Watching me get off the plane and just looking around LA, just going, holy
Oh my
shit,
God,
we're here, and to watch them from that, no one knowing, playing 2 shows to becoming the seminal band that like really created a whole scene that's still really driving what Warped Tour is to this day.
And let me just give you kudos, because you don't work for Warner Brothers and Tom Wally, you don't work for Maverick and Guy and Madonna unless you really got chops and you really are doing something special. Those are houses that had really significant, they wanted significant signatures. It wasn't by numbers anymore, right?
Of course.
No, those are real creative houses. At that time, they really were.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, part of it is the drive and the incredible workaholism that I just can't stop.
And that's the commitment connection.
Exactly,
Right?
and we were talking about the idea that it's not done till you're done. You don't like, there's no like clock. Oh, it's at 10 at night. We're clocking out. That doesn't exist in this world.
My stepdaughter's in the control room. She hears that about every 4 hours in our
Yeah.
house. Like,
You too?
commit.
You too?
So yeah, exactly.
One quick question.
Sure, man.
I've never asked this question, and there's a slight reason why I'm asking you this question. What's your take on should a band be able to perform the record they make in the studio live? I say no. What say you?
Well, I say yes, but with a disclaimer that they should have the ability to be able to get there in an organic fashion. Meaning, if I'm developing an artist, if I'm A&Ring an artist, there should be a curve that I make a record that is maybe 9 months to a year ahead of where they are. That they should be able to build it in a van, in a club, and by the time they get to the place where the record is at, they've actually earned it.
There was a band in Atlanta when I was growing up, and they were all studio musicians. And when you'd go see them live, it was identical to the record. So why go to the concert? Just buy the record. I think live performance is live performance, records are records, novels are novels. Hemingway wouldn't write a novel hoping that Spielberg could make a movie out of it. Why should, anyway, my
Yeah, I mean,
tirade.
I think the Police are probably my all-time favorite band, that just influenced me on so many levels as far as reggae and ska and rock and punk and the whole thing, and just as songwriters and a lyricist, the whole thing, and I've seen them a bunch, and there's always like these, 5-8 minute vamps of him just like doing sing-alongs where and that's the thing that's a little frustrating to me as far as a guy that came up on live music and that loves a great live show, to see how many bands played a track, and how do you really stop and say, that dude that looks like Jerry Garcia, whatever it is that you want to pick, and just have a moment, a live moment to stop. Come on up and sing.
Right.
How do you, it's so much harder, because if you're running, if you have the drummer's got the laptop and then you stop and then you're trying to find out where you stopped as you scrolling, like it's just, it must
so
be,
well.
must be, and then how do you come back in without the click? It must be so frustrating.
Yep.
Maybe it's not. Maybe the idea of having that safe route of just like we know exactly what we're going to say between every song. Maybe there's something.
I think it leaves
I don't know.
opportunity open for other genres. Like when I was going, like to me, and particularly what you did with Goldfinger, when the energy of ska and rock, when it meets, to me, you see it purely live. Like when it gets going live, it's just an awesome force. It just takes sort of the energy on stage that you're bringing and the kind of the syncopation of ska, but sort of that rock power.
Yeah.
It just explodes there. And as good as a record is, that's a whole other arena.
It was Fishbone for me, man. I saw Fishbone probably like 30 times when I first moved to LA.
They were just sick.
That was the best live band I've ever seen. And Angelo Moore, I mean, literally, he was just like just like a bouncing bean. Just, I mean, he'd walk on people's heads. He'd run out and walk like 100 yards into the audience on people's heads. And I'd just be like, how does this guy do this? I mean, it was like a gymnast almost,
Amazing.
you know, but the energy.
Sick.
Yeah.
All you took away from that concert was the guy could walk on people's heads.
Well,
that's a Feldman moment right there, Herb.
Well, tee up your Feldman arm because you're about to pitch some batter's box questions. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. So, Mr. Feldman, you're at the plate. Batter's box. Throw away, sir.
Okay, John, vocals.
Manly cardioid.
Nice.
Reverb.
Revive.
Strings.
LA scoring strings.
Ooh.
Direct box, guitar.
Avalon.
Oh. Bass.
P-bass.
Uh-oh. Your favorite guitar brand.
Les Paul.
Stereo bus.
X-Logic SSL.
Ooh. He's good, Herb.
Oh, no. Better than good.
Room mic. Your
Cole.
choice of why, room mic.
Cole's, just the punchiness, the sponginess, the openness, the whole spirit, everything.
The weirdest instrument you've ever recorded.
A clarinet through autotune.
Nice.
Phallic on so many levels. Island plug-in.
Futzbox.
Ah, I love Futzbox. Oh, that's it, Herb. I got no more.
2013 winner.
I think that was an all-star performance, Herb.
Oh, bat speed? In
Yeah.
terms of bat speed?
Yeah.
Yeah, like maybe top one or two. Pow, pow, pow. Congratulations, bro. Killed it. Hey, I mean, you did well, but sometimes you just come up against a giant.
Remember, you're on my side.
No, I am, and I'll make up with you afterwards. So we're on air. Well, let's keep this momentum going and introduce our favorite guy in the corner office, Chongor. How are you?
Chongor.
Yeah. And before you start, Chongor, shout out to all the work you're doing. You are looking svelte and running and paying attention to your diet, and we recognize that. Good job, bro.
Well, thank you.
Okay, man.
There's
Tee
a
up.
plug-in for that,
Weight loss?
Yeah.
This first one's from Toby Patrick. What has been the biggest shift in mixing and production styles that you've noticed in pop punk from the 90s skate punk to the current sound of today?
Wow, nice
That's
question.
yeah,
John.
it's a great question. I mean,
Great audience.
at least when I started, I mean, I was so influenced by skateboard and surf culture. I mean, I started bleaching my hair when I was probably like 17 because of Dwayne Peters, this famous skateboarder back in the 80s. And
Wow.
so, I mean, when I listen to those records, I would listen to them now when I listen to The Adolescents and Social Distortion and Black Flag. I mean,
Yep.
I think the question has something to do with bus compression, but I could be wrong. But I can't hear really any sort of bus compression. I feel like they just mixed and sent it to whoever mastered
absolutely.
those
Put the
albums
record
back
out.
then. So I mean, the 80s, it was all about the energy and capturing the band live. I mean, one of my favorite records as a kid was Dance With Me, the True Sounds of Liberty record, and there's so many out-of-tune guitars on that album, but I don't give a shit. It reminds me of being a kid when I listen to it now.
Absolutely.
And then we get on into the like the 90s with NoFX and Bad Religion and Pennywise and the whole kind of epitaph sound. I mean, to me, it just changed so drastically for me with Suffer. As a Bad Religion record, Suffer, Brett Gurewitz just really, he was the mixer and the producer on that record, the guitar player and the main writer. I think they just bought a studio and they just kind of had an engineer that knew what he was doing. It changed so drastically sonically on that album forward. For most of the 90s, all those records, it was just wide stereo guitars, super clicky kick drum, and then kind of in the 2000s now, it's really like, to me, it's like gang vocals. And most of the kind of punk bands, like A Day to Remember, like most of the bands that are like running kind of the scene now, it's like all huge anthemic gang vocal style choruses. And the guitars are almost more metal, like they're more kind of down, like more technically proficient players in the kind of pop punk of today, compared to I mean, the 90s, there was great players too, but when I grew up in the 80s, the players weren't. I mean, they just did it because there's nothing. They were kicked out of school, and they were just a bunch of, meth heads.
Absolutely.
Not that I,
We're not condoning that.
No.
Made for great music. Chong, give us another one.
This next one's from Pa Hundley. What is the most important thing that you think about going to the studio with the band for the first time?
The live show. I mean, to me, it's all about that, because if they can, the live show and a singer that like, I mean, and sometimes there's a band, Foxy Shazam, that I worked with a few years ago, that I just saw the live show. I kept going back to the live show. I was like on the fence. Do I want to work with this band? Do I want to work with this band? And the singer is just like, I mean, it's a cartoon character that sang like Freddie Mercury. I've never seen or heard anything like it. Probably the best live show I've seen since Fishbone, to be honest, And to me, in my opinion, the songs, were not all, they just weren't there yet. But I knew that the singer would be able to deliver live if we were able to get the songs together and make the right records. And so, I mean, I think what I do best, of all the stuff that I do, is probably taking a band from 20% to 90 to 100% in the studio, and help them as far as writing and how to sing, how to take care of your voice, and how to make music. I mean, that's really,
And it has to be completely informed by all your history as a singer, as a player, all the touring you did, all that information comes to the studio and allows you to communicate with the band in a different way, right? Because you're a guy who did it.
well, there's no chance. I mean, I'm not like I meet a lot of people through some of these schools, which is, I think, great. I mean, if I was a lost soul when I was a kid, because it went straight from like The Sound of Music to Black Flag, and it was just like, fuck the world, you know what I mean? So, I mean, and there's a place now for kind of people to go. I mean, with, the LA Recording School and with Full Sail and stuff. So, I mean, but that being, and with that being said, I mean, Look, I mean, I learned on a 4-track, I would just record the bass, the acoustic guitar, and maybe just like I'd beat drums on a table and I'd bounce them down to 1, and that's how I learned, and what is that 12, and what are those knobs, and I would just go and I would twist until I learned how to do it. And I wouldn't be able to make a Black Veil Brides record if I hadn't gone from point A in 1994 to where I am now.
And you're teaching now. There are people watching you talk about what you do who are going to go and experiment with that. That's the beauty of now. Give us another, Chongo.
This last one's from Mark Swan. When producing The Used, did the quirkiness of the band have a dramatic effect on the workflow and your overall vision, or was it mostly inspired by listening to their demos?
I mean, their demos weren't, I wouldn't say they were stellar demos. I mean, the beginning of the whole workflow with them was really about arranging. It was just like, how do we, because they would start with the bridge, and then it would be the chorus. And it's not like there's anything wrong with arranging songs, but it's just like it's got to sort of be appropriate, I think, for the song. And there's a dynamic, especially with that band and that style of music. That kind of early 2000s screamo style of music, that it's all about like the dynamic, it's about the verse, and that huge chorus, it just kicks in. So clearly, yes, is the answer to the question. I mean, there's no way I could. I remember one night, like when the first studio I had was in this like one-bedroom house. My wife was asleep in the other room, and I'd taken all of the kitchen pots, pans, all the cutlery out. It was like 4 a.m. We couldn't get Bert to really get that right emotion in this one bridge, and the rest of the guys in the band were literally throwing pots and pans at him in the middle of the night as I'm just rolling, and we're taking pieces and we're putting it together. But I mean, if a guy's like screaming that loud that he's throwing up, I mean, it's not like you've kind of got to capture the moment. You can't, because if you've got
pushing him past that.
Yeah, once the viol has hit the vocal cords, it's sort of, how do you go back to saying, okay, now we're going for the Michael Jackson chorus when the voice has been destroyed for the night.
Exactly. God, it's a fast hour, isn't it?
Particularly today, yeah.
What you should know is when Will Thompson, our ever-present producer, hit us and said, we can get John Feldmann, we were like, go, get it done.
Oh, tell them who we had the option. No, we can't do that.
No, we can't
I'll
do
tell
that.
you off camera. We had 2 options and we chose you.
Yeah,
You mentioned the other options today.
George Martin?
No.
No.
Can't
That would
say.
be awesome if I won over him.
Cannot
Sir,
tell
it's
you
better.
how much.
Sir Feldy.
Exactly. We often do things in the studio and off the studio. So outside the studio, whether we're speaking or doing our Gear Expo a couple weeks ago, we'd love to include you in some of that stuff if you ever had time.
It'd be an honor. Thank you.
Audience would love you. They're going to love this show, and it's important that that your voice and your perspective is heard. So I'll be bugging you. Is that cool?
Absolutely.
Man, thank you so much for coming. What an absolute pleasure. Before we say goodbye, and Dave, you wrap up, I think at this very chair, I don't know, was it a year ago?
About that, well, pretty close, because it was one of the first episodes we did here.
Yeah, we had Mike Shipley on, and he just was. I did a Facebook post where I was actually nervous when he was here. He just was so legendary, and his records were so seminal. And I was like, oh God, we had gone after him for a while to come, and we were like, come on, Mike, come on. I met just the coolest, funniest, sweetest guy. We had a great hour with him. And actually, for me personally, after the show was over, he said, can we do lunch and talk? And wanted to talk career stuff and so on and so forth. And so I was sort of honored by that. We lost him. He's a giant. Just wanted to give a shout out. Dave, give your thoughts and wrap us up. Yeah, it touches us kind of like that, right?
One of the things I remember about Mike that's kind of unusual is when you listen to We Will Rock You, the feet you hear stomping. One of those was Mike's feet.
Wow.
We're going to miss him. We don't have the greats with us forever. Go study them, spend some time with them, tell them you miss them, tell them you love them. And we're going to miss you, Mike. Sorry, guys.
Say goodnight, man.